Everyone, welcome to this video on lesson 13 of the Earth and Climate Scheme of Work. This is about generating electricity. And this lesson really serves two functions, and I think it's important that you're aware of this before you teach it to students. So one of the functions is this essentially is introducing something that comes up in the physics GCSE, which is about energy resources and how we obtain energy for everyday uses from different resources. So whether that's coal or the other fossil fuels, whether it's biofuels, nuclear, like uranium and stuff, or some of the renewable ones as well. However we do it, this is an introduction to that, and I think the fossil fuel ones are, in a sense, the simplest ones to get your head around. So there's really, really clear links with what they're going to do in their physics GCSE, and we'll talk about energy a little bit as well in this lesson. But also, it's the reason I've put it in here, and this is a bit of a kind of, I wouldn't say a mishmash, but there's a few different things going on, but it's also a really good chance to reinforce what we've been talking about throughout this sequence of lessons, which is the carbon cycle. And again, in the last couple of lessons, we've been looking at what's going on in cars, and I suppose you could say the same about aeroplanes. When fuels get burned, carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere. Last lesson we looked at some of these particulates and other pollutants that are emitted too. What we're looking at in this case is what happens in kind of factories and things like that. So there's kind of two areas of emphasis there, and it's really important that we give students an idea of how they charge their phone and so on, as we're going to see from a kind of energy point of view. It's also really important that we use this as an opportunity to reinforce this bigger picture about the carbon cycle. So I've kind of hinted as to how I might frame this lesson already, but if we start, I mean, firstly, I think it's worth questioning students on what do we use electricity or what do we use energy for. But one of the obvious things they use electricity for, which lots of them, in fact all of them, I would hazard to guess, will be familiar with, is charging their phone. So if I put a phone here like this, if we show a smartphone like this being plugged into the wall and charging, what we want them to understand is, okay, you know that you plug a plug into the socket and you can charge your phone. Where does that come from? Now, what we would hope is that many of your students have some idea about power stations. So we could draw a power station over here. Some of them might not do though, so it would also be worth, if they haven't, showing them some pictures. And again, this is another lesson where I think videos are a really, really good resource to show them actually what power stations look like, where you find them in the local area. So in my job, I travel to the southwest a lot from London and past a big power station at Didcot. I'm sure there's lots of others nearby. But we've got a power station here, and I might draw some gases being emitted because that's going to be relevant for our carbon cycle. I think these are just cooling towers, aren't they? So we don't want to focus on those too much. But anyway, we've got some gases being emitted. What we want to do in this lesson is say, well, okay, we know that if you plug your phone in, it charges up. We know power stations exist, and we think those two are somehow related. How exactly are they related? And this is where we can kind of zoom in on what's going on inside the power station to show how that relates to what they're familiar with in their everyday lives, which is charging their phone. So if I zoom in on what's going on here inside the power station, I could draw something like this as a zoom in to show how this thing works, and I could show that what I'm looking at is inside the power station, something like this. And the way it works, and I'm just going to do a schematic diagram here. Again, there's a great video, I think it's from Canada, that I've watched with so many classes because I think it shows the whole thing perfectly. And I'm just going to focus on a coal power station just because I think it's simple. Also gives you a chance to talk about sulfur dioxide, which came up in the last lesson. But if we talk about what goes on, well, the first thing that happens is you take your coal. So we can draw this for students, these lumps of coal, and you pulverize them. So we pulverize them. That means we make it into a very fine powder. And again, depending on the class you have, you can explain why that's good. we could talk about surface area and rate of reaction, looking ahead to some of what they'll do in the GCSE. And then what we do is we put that into a furnace. So I'm going to draw a furnace like this. Furnace is a word they might not be familiar with, so it's worth labelling this. And essentially, you just want to draw their attention to the fact that a furnace is a big oven, like to a pizza oven or something like that. That's something they might have seen before. So this goes into the furnace, and what you get is a big fire. We just literally burn this coal. And that's used to heat water. Now we'll come to the heating water in a minute, but what we can do further, just to emphasize our point here, is that inside this furnace, if the coal is being burned, I've not labelled this in a very good place, have I? Let me just move down here. What we can do is zoom in on what's going on here and say, well, what's actually happening here? Well, if these are our fuel particles, and again, I'm not going to draw, I'm not going to label them. I don't know the chemical composition of coal exactly. I know gasoline is octane mostly, so it's C8H18, but I don't know about coal. But anyway, we've got these hydrocarbons here, so these are made up of hydrogen and carbon, and there's oxygen, which is taken in from the air, so there's our O2. And again, you can emphasize to students that what's going on inside this furnace is a chemical reaction, leading to the formation of, amongst other things, because there's probably impurities, but we've got the carbon dioxide and water. And if you wanted, you could say there's also a bit of sulfur present, so we could add an S here. And again, this is one of the problems of coal, so this is just revisiting what we did in the atmospheric pollutants lesson, but you do get a bit of this sulfur dioxide being formed as well. And I'll do that in red just to show that that's a pollutant. That's not something that we want. That's pollutant. And then you can say this is what's going on inside the furnace. So to relate this lesson back to the carbon cycle, we can say, well, what's coming out of these towers, these kind of a bit like the big exhaust pipes of the power station? Well, what's coming out is CO2 plus H2O plus some SO2. And you could also talk about particulates as well, because there's sometimes not quite enough oxygen there to burn to get complete combustion for coal. Some carbon monoxide as well, just revisiting what we did last lesson. But anyway, that's just how this relates to the carbon cycle. But we can also, while we're here, I think it's a handy way of introducing this concept or these ideas around how exactly a power station works. Now, I'm not going to draw the pipes are super wiggly. I'm not sure what word I'm looking for there. I'm just going to draw it in simple terms like this. So something like that. So I'm just going to draw a pipe like this, going over the furnace. And I'm going to say that we pump water in. And it's worth emphasizing that any power station needs to be close, or any coal power station needs to be close to a source of water. So I'll put water in. So we pump the water in, and then somewhere up here, this becomes steam. So this is liquid water in here, pumped in at relatively high pressure, no doubt. But as it goes over the furnace, it gets heated up like water in a kettle, and it becomes steam. So I'm not sure how I'm going to label this as steam. Maybe I'll just do some something like that. So, but I can show here that what comes up here is not liquid water, it's water vapor or steam, like that. And then we can just show kind of the final part here is that the steam turns this turbine. And again, I used to teach this, and I wasn't really sure what a turbine was. All the turbine is a bit like a water wheel or a windmill, something like that. So obviously wind turbines are a good example of this as well. But it's just something that gets turned by the steam. So this steam is moving with lots of kinetic energy. It's at quite high pressure because it's being pumped in and then heated by this super hot fire by the coal. And it turns this turbine. So we can show that turbine turning and maybe label that. This is a turbine here. And again, emphasize to students that all the turbine is a bit like a water wheel or a windmill or something like that. So the turbine gets turned, and then you can explain to students, and again, this is linking to ideas that they're going to study right at the end of their physics GCSE on generators and stuff. But inside here, what you've got is two really powerful magnets, like this, and a coil of wire. So I'll do a coil of wire like this, which is what we call a generator. So because the turbine is turning, that turns the generator inside here. So I'm going to label that possibly over here as a generator. And again, they don't need to know how that works, because they'll learn about that in their GCSE. But the fact that that generator is turned, that causes electricity to be produced. So we can say that there is an electrical current, and I might label this in red, electrical current, and they studied current in the last unit, so that shouldn't be anything new to them. So we've got an electrical current flowing through the wires like this. And then it's important to say, maybe we should actually explicitly make the link here. We can come back to here and say, well, wires are then going to come out of here. And again, we don't need to go into transformers and things like that, but we could talk about how these then come up and are held up by these big pylons. So we could do some big pylons like this, come back down, and then they end up in our house where we get to the plug socket and we can charge our phone. And we can show that same current that was coming from the generator coming through here like this, and it ends up going from our plug socket into our phone, and it's that current that helps charge our mobile phone battery. So that's a really brief overview of how a coal power station works. And what you'll see is the main aim of this lesson is for them just to be able to describe that. That's really, really helpful in terms of them visualizing the kind of things that they'll need to do later on. It's also, as we've said, a good opportunity to revisit the carbon cycle and the fact that if you're burning coal inside a power station, well, you're going to release CO2. There is one more thing we could talk about, actually, which I neglected to mention, which is energy stores. So again, you might not want to do this for every group. This is something that they will study in more detail in their GCSE. But again, this is a fuel. So this would be, maybe I'm going to do this in green just to show it's a bit different. But this would be a chemical energy store. There's some sort of heating, so you increase the thermal energy store of the water, and by increasing that thermal energy store, you generate steam. So we could talk about number 2. We're going to increase the thermal energy store of the water. We're going to heat the water. That's the energy transfer. Number 3, we can say the steam has kinetic energy over here. And this is one of the, this is a bit more challenging, but essentially, by increasing the kinetic energy store of the turbine and the generator, there's an electrical transfer of energy out, which then ultimately increases the chemical energy store of our phone battery. But I think the main 3 that we want students to understand is that there's chemical store. By heating, we increase the thermal energy store of the water, and we therefore, I suppose, mechanically increase the kinetic energy store of the steam, and therefore the turbine, therefore the generator. Then there's an electrical transfer of energy, which ends up in the home. So that's something you could do as an extension. Again, it depends on the group. But again, just to reiterate, this is a preparation for what they'll learn about in physics, that's the energy stores bit. But it's also, it comes back to our bigger picture, which is the carbon cycle, and everything that we've learned about here to do with carbon dioxide. So in the next lesson, what we're going to look at is ways of generating electricity that don't release CO2 into the atmosphere. And that's where we can really, really start to get into some of these live issues around the greenhouse effect and global warming and climate change. So that will be in the next video.